So welcome everybody to King's College London, to our Bush House complex and to our auditorium here tonight. Great to have so many people here. My name's Rachel Mills. I'm the Senior Vice President Academic here at King's College London, which means I'm like the Deputy Vice Chancellor. So I'm here on behalf of King's to welcome you all to our campus here on the Strand, but most of all to start the introductions for tonight and to our speakers, and we're going to do a joint job of introducing our speakers. So we've come mainly, I'm sure, to hear Dame Tamara Finkelstein, who is going to be in conversation with Professor Michael Sanders, and I'm just going to give a little bit of context about what we're trying to do tonight. So tonight is the relaunch of our School for Government, because our School for Government has moved into the Policy Institute, which is led by Bobby Duffy here on the front row. And so as part of that move into the Policy Institute, which is part of the Faculty of Social Science and Public Policy, universities love a structure, right? We're relaunching our School for Government, which is led by Professor Michael Sanders. And so I'm going to say a few things about the School for Government and about the amazing thing the school does for the faculty and for King's College London. As you come in and take a seat. I'm the warm-up act, by the way, so come and take a seat and get yourself comfortable. Okay. The School for Government has an exciting future within the Policy Institute. Their mission is elegant and simple, but really important for us at King's and important for all of us in this great city and across the UK and globally. And that is to help create a world that is governed with intelligence, integrity, and innovation. And I think we're going to hear about that tonight from Dame Tamara. So those three words are really important: intelligence, integrity, and innovation. We need that in this era of uncertainty. We're seeing rapid change globally. We're seeing extraordinary things happening. So that mission of the school has never been more important. They bring together education and practice in a really distinctive way. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. And that is about building programs that are based on three things. Those three things being partnerships, and that you in the audience tonight are some of our partners. About practice, real practitioners, the real practice of government, and performance, to enhance performance wherever it is found. And I see a real fresh look. I see a fresh look about educating today's leaders and tomorrow's leaders and tomorrow's decision makers as they navigate these turbulent times. Please do come and grab a seat. As you can see, come close. So Michael Sanders took over as director just 1 year ago, and we've seen remarkable momentum. I'm going to embarrass him now. Remarkable momentum since he took over. So just a few things that have happened. So I've seen partnership working with the entire UK civil service, with all policy fast streamers studying here in the School for Government, all of them. They've developed a bespoke master's degree in health and social care policy with the Department of Health and Social Care. Extraordinary. We've got an international development policy practitioners program with the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Again, bespoke training for specialists that is really needed. But also doing research with real impact. So Michael and his team have produced a comprehensive guide for policymakers on designing and delivering randomized trials for social policy. And that was commissioned directly by the Cabinet Office and HM Treasury. So we're used to doing randomized trials in the health sector, but to do this in policy practice is extraordinary. And I'm also so impressed that the team have attracted exceptional visiting faculty, hopefully some of whom are here tonight. So I'll just name a few of those exceptional new faculty that have visited us here. Baroness Camilla Cavendish, former head of the No. 10 Policy Unit. Lord Peter Hain, former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Sir David Green, former Special Advisor and Press Secretary to the former Director of Serious Fraud Office, and Tim Sculthorpe, former Special Advisor and Press Secretary to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So this School for Government can attract extraordinary talent via the visiting professors, via the faculty in the school, and they're doing amazing things. But tonight isn't really about that. Tonight is about Dame Tamara. So I'm going to let Michael to come and do that introduction and say thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to a great conversation. Michael. You're mic'd up. Thank you.
I have a mic, but I'm not sure if you can hear me. Excellent. Solid nodding. Excellent. So those of you who have had the misfortune to have been taught by me, which is some of you, know that being scripted is not entirely my thing. This is a slightly unusual experience for me, having to give remarks in which I am serious and composed. So hopefully that's a sign of improvement, certainly development. So I'm just going to make a few remarks before we get to speak to Tamara. So I want to thank you all for coming to this event, which is primarily about being in conversation with Tamara, but does also serve as our relaunch as the School for Government inside the Policy Institute. We're intensely proud to be a part of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Public Policy at King's, as well as to be part of the Policy Institute, which the school joined 2 years ago. Being at King's and being at the heart of a global, world-leading university in the heart of London means we're really well placed to achieve that mission that Rachel spoke about creating a world that's governed with intelligence, integrity, and innovation. This is a phenomenally exciting time for us as we continue to run long-standing programs with the civil service, but grow those programs to reach out to countries around the world, in particular through our Bendello Scholarship Program for Commonwealth officials. In the last year or so, we've seen a pretty large expansion of our activities. We've launched a master's degree in partnership with the Department for Health and Social Care, which is also in partnership with our Florence Nightingale Faculty of Nursing, Midwifery and Palliative Care, and with Leeds Beckett University, which means we are bringing both policy expertise, clinical expertise, and crucially, we are meeting civil servants where they are in the country rather than everything having to be London-centred, which has obviously been a long-standing priority for the service. We also launched this postgraduate award in professional policymaking for the civil service fast stream in February this year. This is the first program of its kind at King's. It's a real great opportunity for us. It also means, unfortunately, for the fast stream, that they all have to spend 3 days locked in a room with me. But they also get to learn from other amazing colleagues, so they do learn something over the course of the program. This means that we have one of the most exciting, interesting, and diverse cohorts of any school for government anywhere in the world, and that's something that we're intensely proud of. Getting these programs up and running and at the pace that we have done has been an enormous undertaking, and I am so grateful to all of my colleagues, academic and professional services within the school and within the Policy Institute, for putting their shoulder to the wheel to make this happen. I have benefited enormously from their hard work and their brilliance, as well as my own ignorance. So having worked in and around government for most of my career and coming to a university full-time only 3 years ago, I didn't know you couldn't set up a master's degree in 6 months. And nobody told me, so we did. I want to give particular thanks to our colleagues in the Faculty for Social Sciences and Public Policy, without whom none of this would have been possible, because they could at any point have said no, and they have said yes and been intensely supportive throughout that process. I want to particularly call out Professor Rob Francis, who's the Vice Dean for Education, who has been unbelievably patient with me not really knowing how anything works in the context of a university. Alongside our research programs, we have this ever-increasing research output, which covers governance, ethics, public policy, political science, behavioral science, public administration, and policy evaluation. This research is grounded, so we don't just do education. This research is grounded in the practice of government, drawing on lessons from our own experiences and the people that we're working with in government. And I'm trying to try and make sure this research is not just academically rigorous, but also practically useful. I'm especially pleased that our growing number of our civil service students have decided that taking a 5-credit module or a 15-credit module or a master's degree isn't enough for them, and they are joining us as doctoral students alongside their life in the civil service so that they can really straddle that world of practice. Already this year, our research has fed into the UK's comprehensive spending review, so there is real money being spent on interventions by government as a result of the work that we've done. We've seen the scaling up of a programme that promises to prevent 90,000 uses of force a year by the police, so pretty pleased with that. And the launch of a programme that should see more than 300 young people from disadvantaged backgrounds attending selective universities like King's, contributing not only to our mission to achieve social mobility for those young people, but also to create a world that is better governed by leading to civil servants being more representative of the country that they are there to serve. In the new year, we'll be launching 3 new research labs that draw together our existing research, and we're very excited to talk to you about that then. Very quickly, a final reflection before I do move on, is to say there could not be a more important time for a school for government, especially one in the heart of London, positioned as it is. More than at any time in the last 80 years, the future seems uncertainty and riven with risk, division, and often outright hatred. The role of a university in this time, and particularly a school for government, is vital. In many senses, we are obliged both morally and legally, to be impartial and certainly not to take political sides or to make political statements. That impartiality, however, need not imply meekness. As a School for Government, we will vigorously defend the impartiality of our civil service, which is one of the great assets of this country. We will stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone who wants to genuinely see outcomes improve, especially those whom society otherwise ignores, overlooks, or marginalizes. We will vigorously defend evidence and its role in policymaking. We have been at the forefront of the revolution in the use of behavioral science and the What Works movement that have begun to see a radical, if incremental, change in outcomes for people. Being genuinely impartial means being on the side of evidence, and that means being on the side of truth. As someone once said, our political masters are entitled to their own opinions, but they are not entitled to their own facts. In the spirit of perpetuating the best traditions of an impartial, evidence-based civil service, I am delighted to introduce this evening's star attraction. Dame Tamara Finkelstein, who was until recently the Permanent Secretary of the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs after a storied and hugely impactful career in the civil service. In roles across government, perhaps most prominently working early in her career on Sure Start, she has touched the lives of millions of people across the country, a profound impact that most politicians would envy, despite never, and there is probably a lesson here, ever trending on social media. So, Tamara, welcome. Welcome, Tamara.
Thank you.
Let's start talking about Sure Start. So early in your career, you worked on Sure Start, which is sort of still considered by many a major policy and implementation success. So not just a great idea, but something that actually worked in the new Labour era. So what was it like working on that policy? And did you know at the time, did you have a feeling that it was going to have the impact that it has?
Thank you. And I'll come to that. It was really important for me in terms of shaping my approach to policy making. But first, just to say a massive thank you for having me here and for the work that the school does. And just because you've referred a couple of times to the fast streamers doing their kind of work here, you know, the policy profession working with King's developed the kind of diploma that people can then do into a master's for policy professionals. And when we were reshaping the fast stream to move away from, there is no generalist fast stream anymore, which I'm very proud of. We can talk about that if we want at some point. But the government policy fast stream, to give them a really fantastic experience to develop their professional skills, it was really obvious to come here, and they are doing some of those modules, and the feedback is phenomenal, and I feel very optimistic that therefore they've got the real bedrock of professionalism in policy making that they need. So anyway, it's fantastic what you're doing and the whole range of things, and I'm delighted to be here today. So you know, you asked me about Sure Start. It was sort of the beginning of my senior civil service career, and it was the thing that kept me in the civil service because it made me think, oh, actually we can do things in a way that I can see has impact on people. And what was sort of felt very unique about it at the time was that it was deeply evidence-based. It emerged out of the kind of cross-cutting reviews as part of the early spending review announced in 1998. Which asked some sort of big questions, and the big question, a big question about early years and those -9 months to 3, and settled on a programme that focused on children in deprived areas and their families. So deeply evidence-based, totally outcome focused. So the idea was, well, what are the outcomes you're looking for, and then a decision of, well, which departments therefore need to be involved. So it was very cross-departmental, and it had what sometimes was a challenge, but was a benefit, which was that there were lots of people who claimed that they had invented Sure Start, and we used to tell ourselves, it was very difficult, lots of ministers who said it was theirs, that the problem would be when there was no minister who would say it was theirs. That was a much bigger problem. So deeply cross-departmental, and it also had the biggest evaluation programme that any sort of policy had at the time, and it is that evaluation that has shown us that because the evaluation was a kind of standalone link to the unit, but then is now held by the IFS, and has shown that actually you can see evidence of actually better outcomes from school at the end of school career for those who were in the programme. So that set of things and the fact that you could work in that way massively impacted me. Maybe I can just say, like, that was obviously quite a long time ago, but the ways in which that's influenced things I worked on since then, I was thinking, I worked after the Grenfell Tower fire on building safety. And obviously that had to be kind of done at pace, because the big question, in the way there was a big question that Shaw sought to answer, was looking at that building and what happened that night. It looks like something happened that could be true for other buildings. So we should look at that. That's the kind of, that I came days after the fire to look at. And we did take the programme, obviously everything moving at great pace in a crisis, but we did manage to take a step back and go, okay, what's the outcome we're looking for in the work that we're doing? And it was that people who are living in a high-rise building should be safe from fire and the fear of fire now and in the future. And that was quite important framing, because it meant it was outcomes that we were seeking to do. So it wasn't good enough to do things that we thought might mean people were less at risk at fire. If still people felt at risk from fire, that led us to do various things, including with the fire brigade around putting night watches in and so on. And also there were things we were going to have to do right now, but also we needed to be doing the work so that actually we would reform the whole building safety system in the future. So setting those outcomes was, again, deeply getting the people involved who are deeply evidence-based, absolutely critical. And I was prompted by the fact that last week the government's new environmental improvement plan was published, that the work to do the Environment Act, which that is comes from, was again, the Environment Act is really the kind of companion piece to the Climate Change Act that set our net zero target. And the Environment Act, again, sets in the legislation itself areas of outcome around water, air, biodiversity and waste. I'll start on a list of 4 and you worry about forgetting one. And setting targets both right into the long-term targets to meet in a similar way to net zero. Again, for all of those, deep scientific base with your targets are required. So various things that I've worked on since have needed that kind of element of how you do good policy making.
So I want to just touch on the sort of cross-departmental nature of Sure Start. Good cross-departmental working is great, but it is very far from guaranteed. Why do you think Sure Start worked across departments so well?
So I think it makes the most massive difference if government is setting at the highest level the outcomes it's looking to get, and that's what happened there. And it was very relevant. The Treasury was a key part of it. They were seeking to see those outcomes, and money flowed from that, and it was going to be supported in that way. So that was very important. Just before actually going to work on Sure Start, I worked on public service agreements. That was not their finest hour, but it was kind of when they were developed, and they were setting outcomes cross-government, priority outcomes cross-government. As they started to, one of their issues at the beginning was actually that the data didn't really support tracking outcomes. So it took quite a few years before some of the most important outcomes one seeks to do had the data that would allow you to do it. And at that point, probably kind of 7 years or so into those to that approach, you started to get those being led with real accountability by somebody senior in a department with a mixed board from across different departments seeking to meet those agreements. they kind of lost out in 2010 as being kind of not invented here, which I think was a great shame. I do think missions are a way of doing the same thing. So I think to make it work, there have to be prioritised outcomes, and there has to be a sense of accountability and a way of measuring that accountability, and the money needs to follow as well. That's critical.
And so what lessons do you think you would ask a junior civil servant, so perhaps somebody who isn't in the centre, isn't in Treasury, that what could they learn from Sure Start in their careers?
Well, I think taking that approach of when you look at a problem, however big or small it is, first of all, recognising that almost all interesting policy problems are systems problems. So when you look at it, you need to think, well, what are the outcomes I'm seeking to achieve, and can I test those and make sure that I am trying to achieve the outcomes that are that ministers want me to achieve? What are the set of skills and actually professions I might need to answer that question? Is it something where do I need an economist, a scientist? What's the mix of team and people I need to put together? Which departments matter? System mapping, effectively, to try and assess that. I mean, I think a kind of deep connection with the analysis and the evidence, and not shortcutting that, because I think you can do that. You can sometimes do those things at pace when you need to do that, and thinking evaluation right at the beginning as well.
I'm always happy for people to think about evaluation as soon as possible.
And just one thing on the wanting the kind of the kind of analysis quickly. The problem that this junior policy official you describe will say is, well, it's all very well saying I need to kind of get the evidence, the analysis, but I've got to put up a submission tomorrow. So I kind of need it at pace. And I learnt by the Department of Health, Chris Whitty was the Chief Scientific Advisor and Head of Analysis. And he would say, when you said, look, I need some analysis right now for this submission tomorrow, he'd go, we will give you whatever we can at pace, but this is the condition, that you commit to coming to a workshop next week, at which we'll go, what do you need to know in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, and 5 years' time? And then we can build the analytical programme. And that sort of relationship that you can build as a policy person with the analytical profession is what you need to do.
I'm very in favour of all of that. I wish people would ask me for things more in advance. I think that's a common complaint among analysts. So you were Director General and then later Permanent Secretary at DEFRA from 2018 onwards until this year, which overlapped with quite a lot of Brexit-related shenanigans. And DEFRA was obviously a key part of that because of the Common Agricultural Policy and that's role in the EU. What was it like as an impartial civil servant working on a policy that was so politically contentious?
Yeah, so I mean, I came to DEFRA to lead the Brexit work, and then I became the Permanent Secretary. It was 10 days before the first potential no-deal date that actually was sort of where that was paused 2 or 3 days before, can't remember. So it was deep in the kind of Brexit work. I mean, the first thing I should say is that, I mean, Brexit massively changed DEFRA, because as you said, it's a department, where food, farming, environment, all were basically the way DEFRA worked was to implement what the EU passed into its own kind of blank page legislation or anything. So it was a massive shift for DEFRA, and a big challenge. I had to do very different things. Had to do legislation, big bills. We did the Environment Bill Act that I talked about, the Agriculture Act, a Fisheries Act, really major kind of pillars. Hadn't done that before. Had to do trade agreements, not something that we'd done before. That was done by the EU, and also build IT systems, because we used a lot of EU IT systems. They were all going to shut. So so very beginning, so had to get very different skills and different approach. So it was massive change. I would say, I think for civil servants in DEFRA, change is difficult. Change is just hard. So, you know, it was obviously a politically contentious issue. A decision has been made. Our role as civil servants is to implement. But change is very hard. And particularly, you know, DEFRA is a very science-based department. We have a lot of expert scientists, both in the core department and across our arm's-length bodies. And I really remember going to visit CFAS, which is our marine and fisheries science organisation. And this was kind of 18 months into Brexit, and they showed me a picture. And the first picture was everyone in CFAS looking at a sort of spider phone, which was actually my predecessor, the day after the Brexit vote, sort of talking to people about the kind of change that we needed to make. And people just looked completely shell-shocked because their networks, the way they worked, was very much within the EU. And then about 18 months later, a picture of lots of very smiley people, because they had been a European reference lab, and that was what they were like. This is who we are, how we identify. And they'd become an international reference lab in that time. That was the action they took, and they'd done it. So change is hard, but people made change. But as you said, the political environment obviously was incredibly challenging, and people are working lots of Brexit teams. I was always calling it EU exit in the same way as I think civil servants were quite careful about calling the community charge rather than the poll tax. But that's clearly slipped. But anyway, we had lots of teams working on EU exit right across the piece, and every day there would be something going on in Parliament. Huge, you know how it was at that time. Each day would just bring something absolutely massive in the political context we were working in. And so I took to basically daily, I would do a stand-up, and I would structure it three ways. The first thing I'd do is explain what happened that day. And if I hadn't completely followed it, I always made sure I listened to Brexit Cast. I don't know if people listen to Brexit Cast, which was the forerunner of newscast on the radio.
Other podcasts are available.
Other podcasts are lots of fantastic podcasts available. But I would listen to Brexit Cast because it would make sure I absolutely did know whatever shenanigans had gone on or what it meant. So I'd explain that, and then I'd pretty much always say, you have to do today exactly what you were planning to do yesterday, because there wasn't actually a shift for almost everybody in what they had to do as a result of what happened. And the third bit was anything you need, anything that you're feeling that you want to share. And I need to do it every day, because the context changing made people think, well, there feels like there's more of a chance of no deal. Well, the truth was we had to be ready for no deal. So the people who were doing that work needed to do it whatever had happened the day before. So I think that was, as it often is in a sort of crisis-type environment, but this was obviously longer term than a crisis. It was but it was something that was moving. Where the context is moving all the time, I think it's how do you lead people through that?
And in the context of things moving quickly, we've obviously had, in recent years, quite a high level of ministerial turnover, shall we say. And I think we'd hoped that we were going to be past that, but we were complaining we had, I think, 17 housing ministers in 14 years, and we've now had 2 in the last 18 months. So at least on housing, the pace of change continues. How, as a senior civil servant, do you feel about fast ministerial turnover? How do you handle it? How do you encourage juniors to handle it? One of my wonderful colleagues is doing a part of their PhD on the effects of ministerial turnover on the civil service. So I was wondering if you could perhaps just tell us the answer now.
Yes. And obviously turnover is difficult, but it is kind of part of the job. I do think as a permanent secretary, as a senior kind of leadership, you have to do everything that you can do to support department kind of through change, and certainly I regarded it as being the skill I needed to develop is how do you work with the new, I mean I had 7 secretaries of state, quite a lot more ministers, but 7 secretaries of state in my 6 years as a permanent secretary, and it's challenging for them, you know, it's challenging for any secretary of state when they first turn up. And with DEFRA, we almost always manage to serve up a flood or some sort of animal disease in the early days to sort of help people to sort of make it particularly difficult for people. So, yeah, turnover is difficult, and I mean it does. There's no question that it impacts delivery. If I think about the changes that we were making or continuing to make on farming and how we support farmers. Obviously, throughout most of the time, I'm talking about there's a Conservative government, but each Secretary of State had a slightly different view about kind of quite how we should do that. And that meant that, therefore, you did have to go a bit back to the drawing board, give them the chance to kind of influence the shape of that policy, and that, no doubt, that definitely impacted delivery. And clearly for people out there, those who sort of the kind of farming sector leaders, but farmers themselves, could feel that kind of uncertainty, and that is, it's not great for delivery. There's no question about that. I think, but there is something though also about how do you lead people through that, because civil servants have to learn how do you get how do you support ministers in that kind of change for the best. You know, obviously when there's an actual change of party, as we had, you know, how do you get people to sort of shed even some of the language that they've got used to using to sort of be very open book, start again, because as I always say, like, no one elected us. So, and whoever turns up, and that's the job. Yeah.
So to look to the future of who might turn up, at least some political parties at the next election are likely to be advocating a move away from the model of an impartial civil servant that serves the government of the day, the kind of civil servant that you have been for your entire career, towards a more political civil service with senior officials appointed directly by ministers. What would you say to those politicians, and why is civil service impartiality so important?
So I've said the first thing is, like I do kind of get the point as to why people might kind of worry about that. I really, you know, you turn up and there's all these people who just were working for the other lot, who you've been trying to fight in an election and have very different views from, and the idea that that person is going to be able to give you advice, you know, at the most senior level, I do sort of understand that. And I was in the Treasury in 1997, and Gordon Brown was incredibly suspicious of the Treasury. I think it took us quite a long time as a department to get his trust, because I think he looked and thought, well, how is it possible to sort of be impartial in that way? As I say, I think it's the skill is being able to do that, and I genuinely have absolutely no idea of the political views of my peers at all. So I think it's very deeply in us, the sort of whoever turns up, and no one elected us. But why would I say? I mean, one of the things is that you know, if you're a politician, it's really clear, if you've got civil servants, that you are the politician, and I'm not expected to have a political view, and I'm there to know my stuff and to be able to help them deliver on their agenda. It does seem to me that if you have a kind of the first lot of political layers, you sort of inevitably have people who do have their own views, because they're a sort of political appointment. They probably have a much stronger view. And so I think that is a great sort of clouding of of responsibility, potentially. as to kind of, you know, who's actually kind of leading the department in that way, who's actually sort of shaping the direction of travel. I mean, clearly our kind of, what we see as a permanent civil service should be providing a continuity, a sort of knowledge of the system and a knowledge of the particular work of that department, the knowledge and understanding of who the stakeholders are, and to be able to let someone get up and running really quickly. I do think, though, that if the civil service is going to win that debate or win that argument, the civil service has to change. Because I say, you know, we hold the knowledge, we have the professionalism, we understand our domains. I don't think that's as true as it needs to be. I think there is work to do, with the help of places like King's, to improve that. You know, we have to be the best at our game. We have to be, you know, right at the cutting edge of digital change. We have to have met the kind of challenge of do we work effectively together to deliver outcomes. So there is a lot of change I think the civil service has to do to meet that challenge, I'd say.
Yeah. It's the thing at the end of the leopard where if for everything to stay the same, everything's going to have to change.
Yes.
So people in the civil service are obviously interested in current affairs. They listen to Brexitcast, Newscast, other things are available. We have our own podcast. If you want to listen to that, I'm a middle-aged man. I needed one. It was part of the process, and because of that, they're likely to be interested in politics since an early age, and they probably have got political views, many of them. But sometimes those are going to go against the government of the day. Without asking you what your political views are, of course, how would you handle a situation where an official really feels very strongly against the mission of the government of the day?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you say, a lot of people are quite mission-driven. I mean, DEFRA very much is a department, and some of the kind of bodies in the DEFRA group are people, you know, and that can have challenges. I do think that if you want to be a civil servant, you have to understand that point, that you are there to help the government of the day deliver their outcomes, deliver the outcomes they're seeking to achieve, and if you get to a point where you feel your red lines are crossed, you have to leave. And I've always felt that about myself, and I always get asked by, you know, by up and coming kind of civil servants, you know, what do you do when that happens? And it hasn't happened yet. And I put it down to the fact that I very rarely work with a minister who doesn't feel to me to be someone who is trying to make things better for people and has a view about how to do that. You know, and is generally willing to sort of listen and discuss and then take decisions, which is the gig. So I basically think that's what we're there to do. As I say, in DEFRA, you know, the mission is very much around some of the outcomes. They're now set in legislation in our Environment Act, for example. So that's a framework. That's not, you know, obviously you could have a government that came and wanted to change that, and then people would have to make their own decisions as to whether that went beyond what where they wanted to work, as and people would sort of make those decisions. So I think because the civil service gets a lot of criticism that people move around a lot, and I really recognise that, and I do think there is something that we need to do about ensuring that at a certain point people are deepening their domain knowledge, and to make them the best they can be. But some of the moving around does help with not becoming so attached to something so specific that actually you find it quite hard to shift when somebody wants to do something different in this space that you have nurtured for so long. So there's an upside to the moving around.
Very good. So you first started working in the civil service in 1992 when you were, I presume, a small child. which is before most of today's fast streamers were born, it's fair to say. Where do you hope the service will be in 33 years' time?
Well, so oddly, I actually sort of started in 1990 because I came into the civil service on a scheme called a cadet economist scheme where I did 2 years at, I shouldn't say LSE, should I here, but 2 years
Other
there
universities are also available.
a diploma and a master's on this scheme. In fact, Tom Scholar and I were on the same scheme. But yes, it's rather a long time ago, and we started on Sure Start, and there started to be a point where I'd say something about Sure Start on a stage like this, and someone would come up to me and say, actually, I was a Sure Start mum, and it made this change to my life. And not long before I left, there were people coming up to me and going, I was a Sure Start baby. So, which when I realised I've been in the civil service a very long time. And one of the things is that when I joined, if I looked at the top of the civil service at that time, if you told me I would, certainly a permanent secretary, I thought you were completely mad, but even getting anywhere close. Getting on in the civil service as I saw the top of it at that time, it didn't look anything like me. Very white, very male, very English for me, would seem to me, and but it's changed over that time. And the reason I say that is because one of the things I say to people coming into the civil service is you will see that change. So one of the major things I hope will change over that period is that now if you look at the top of the civil service, it has changed, and I feel comfortable in that space, but it's still, on ethnicity, on class, etc. And actually place. We still have a very long way to go, but I hope you'd look at it at that time, and it would look very different. So that's kind of one thing, and it needs to be sooner than 33 years or whatever it is. I think. One of the kind of missions I was kind of working on, particularly with the policy profession, was about this deeper professionalisation. So I would like to, and a lot sooner than that, see every civil servant seeing themselves as having a kind of primary profession, engaging in professional learning and continuous professional development. And it would be unacceptable not to be that. And generalist skills are something everybody needs in any profession, but being a generalist to allow you not to engage in your professional skills would be unacceptable. Clearly, the world, the technology that we use, and the digital transformation we need to make in the civil service, much sooner than the date line you're talking about, we will work completely differently with the technology around us. It'll be AI, but it'll be way beyond that. The way in which people and technology will operate together to achieve things will be very different. What I'd love to see is for the civil service to be at the real forefront of that, and actually to be a sort of anchor procurer of some of the really innovative approaches. And this question about collaboration, the silos in which we work, that has to shift. Working in a more outcomes-based way with multidisciplinary teams, looking at problems in a systems-based way, and our leadership supporting that. I think those things, so greater diversity, that deepened professionalism, technologically completely different and collaborative would be what I would hope to see.
Okay. So moving from a profession that sometimes gets accused of being too much of generalists to one that is certainly proud of specialism, you've just been named last week as the new Chief Exec of the Royal Academy of Engineering. So I wonder if you could talk to us a bit about that role. What's attracted you to it? What are your hopes for the future there?
Yes, well, yeah, I'm very excited about starting that in February. Partly, in the sort of later years, probably after working on building safety and since then, I did a lot of work jointly with scientists and engineers in government, and I worked closely with Patrick Vallance when he was the Chief Scientific Advisor to bring kind of the policy makers and scientists and engineers closer together in understanding each other's worlds to be able to work effectively together. And it took me to a place of thinking that science and engineering holds the answer to lots of the public policy problems that I've worked on. Building safety, climate adaptation, unlocking prosperity. So I was interested in doing a role that somehow took science, engineering and public policy. And the Royal Academy of Engineering, which is an extraordinary fellowship of the engineers and technologists from academia, from industry and entrepreneurs, the best in our country, and has a role in advising government, but also does a lot in for entrepreneurs in terms of supporting startups in London, but now across the country. So it's a chance for me to continue a kind of career of public purpose, which is very central to me, in this way, outside the civil service, but you know, with these extraordinary engineers, and hopefully to do good in a different environment, and to learn more, particularly in that kind of entrepreneur, raising funds for some of the kind of startups, that space, which I've done less of in government, so we'll have a chance to learn a bit more about.
Very exciting. Well, we wish you all the best with that, and obviously we hope that you'll continue to come and visit us here at King's, despite the fact that I now know you went to the LSE. I think we have some time to take questions from our audience, and I'm going to point, there's a person on the edge there. I'm very reluctant to take multiple questions at the same time because I can never remember them all, but...
that allows me to only answer ones I can find easy.
Great, so we'll take a few questions.
No, I don't mind, I don't mind.
Good evening, Dame Tamara, and thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. And working in agriculture policy at the minute, I'm very interested in what strikes us in Northern Ireland particularly, but also across the UK, is other government departments doing things that impact us massively, and we have little to no say over them. And I'm just wondering how you manage that, how for example, the inheritance tax stuff very recently with farmers. I know Treasury-led policy, DEFRA is left to pick up the pieces. Just really interested in how that's managed and how you work through those challenges. Thank you.
Do you want to see this one?
Sure.
Yes. Well, I mean, I would say that in any department and that you have an important role to ensure that you're coordinating on behalf of a sector that you have a responsibility for, and DEFRA has a responsibility in agriculture policy, and does, in the main, work really closely with other departments that impact that impact on agriculture, and tries to be a kind of centre for doing that. So, for example, agri-tech is part of the industrial strategy because of working with those in the sector. That being very important, and saying, let's ensure we get agri-tech into the industrial strategy. So when it works really well, that's what we should do. We should lead. We should understand the sector, understand the stakeholders, understand our peers, and influence them. There is always a problem with tax because the Treasury, and I was in the Treasury for 20 years, so guards its its ownership of tax policy very jealously, guards that, and doesn't and therefore doesn't kind of share on that. So there was clearly something in the air around that, and both the sector and DEFRA did share and talk a bit ahead of that decision being made. But being tax policy, we did not have quite the notice that we would want to have, or as much input on the data and so on as one might have expected to do. So I understand that was probably not DEFRA's finest hour.
It's very Treasury to blame DEFRA for HMT announcing a tax change. Let's go John down here in the second row, and then the person in the row. Oh, do you want them? Okay, so John in the second row, then the person with a green jumper and a scarf. I apologize for the temperature of the room.
Thank you. Hi. Thanks so much for the discussion so far. I find the example of Sure Start to be really an very interesting one, because it was a popular policy with very good evidence backing it, but nevertheless, we saw that once the Conservatives came in, they basically got rid of it. And so I guess my question is, do we think that that's going to be fundamentally a limitation of any policy making that is lacking in political engagement then? And how do you think we have to adapt to this? And when you look at Project 2025 in the US, you would think that a lot of things are relatively apolitical, but nevertheless have they've gone into gut it essentially, right? So, for example, of National Park Services, which you would think is relatively bipartisan, but nevertheless has gotten hit. So yeah, just wondering how you think we would be able to respond to that.
Yeah.
We'll take a second question, so you can avoid any questions about the US administration. There's a person there.
That's going to let me remember.
Completely ineffectual waving by me, sorry.
Mine's a very different question. Hello, Dame Tamara. I work for Kainos. We're one of the digital delivery partners who helped build the EU exit systems to ensure we could do trade on the borders. You mentioned the importance of digital skills, capability, understanding. What do you advise, or what would you like the role of suppliers like our company or the supply chain in general to play to build that capability within the civil service?
Okay. Great. Okay. So, I mean, taking your question about the problem, I mean, I described both on public service agreements or on Sure Start of that change. But, how do you things that that survive a change of administration? And I mean, one of the things is doing work on Sure Start. How do you get the evidence? Now, one of the problems for Sure Start is that inevitably, you needed a longitudinal study so that you could say that those who popped up at the other end, but it was quite a long time down the line, that you could genuinely see that shift in outcomes. We did do stuff that looked shorter term, and so the more that you can have things that are evidence, that may well be something that a future government looks at and maybe thinks twice before doing something different. The interesting thing also with Sure Start is that we built quite a lot of infrastructure. One of the things that the kind of the review that led to the setting up of Sure Start found was that we were so ingrained that government was only and the public realm was only interested in children once they started school, that even playgrounds were often not very. It's sort of odd to imagine now, but are not really aimed at the younger age. So a lot of infrastructure was built, and actually, we actually had, as part of there was money for it to do quite a lot of investment in really kind of cutting edge early years infrastructure, and in local areas that are still doing things, they might not call it Sure Start, but doing really good stuff on early years, they're using that infrastructure. And there is now work on these family hubs, and some of the infrastructure still exists to do that. So if as part of your programme you can build some infrastructure, that can really, really help. I just like to sort of give a shout out some stuff that I was working on before I left, and that someone called Lucy Smith has been doing some work on as part of a Hayward Fellowship. I've got to mention another place, Blavatnik School for Government, but which is on long-term strategic thinking. We don't do long-term strategic thinking in this country in the way that would be good for our outcomes. And I actually have to say I was worried as head of policy profession that the current government would rock up and go, we're looking at a decade of renewal, help us think about this long-term strategy. And actually, as a civil service, we wouldn't be as capable as we should be of answering that question. So, as it happened, they haven't yet quite asked the question as far as I can work out. But she's done some work on a really good, a playbook as to how would you do that work. And that you would hope you would try and do that in a way that built on some areas where you could, more cross-party consensus. But, we live in a democracy. There's always going to be the risk that that changes. And I won't get into the US, I'll take that advice. But that's my thought on that. On the digital skills front and working with suppliers, and we've got quite a way to go on building our sort of digital skills and capability. But obviously, those kind of partnerships with people like Kainos, are absolutely critical. And I mean, I felt as a permanent secretary that I didn't really have the equivalent of my chief scientific advisor, who I had on science, somebody who really was, deeply understood science, came into government and could really advise me on science. I didn't have that on digital. So this is not so much an answer about the kind of suppliers, but I did feel that we should be looking at getting a sort of cadre of chief digital officers of the nature of the chief scientific advisors into departments, and actually enable them to form a bit of a cohort, because one of the things is, I have a chief scientific advisor in the front row, is that by being a community themselves, they can deal with the insanity of having been dropped into government by supporting each other, which I think somebody would need if they came in as that sort of chief digital officer. But I desperately needed that in order to do the scale of transformation I had to make. But there is a lot to do in terms of the partnerships that we can then have with our suppliers, to be able to get those transferable skills. We did a lot in DEFRA, actually, of recruiting, recruiting people without digital knowledge and sort of skilling them up. And we did that very much in partnership with our suppliers, as you may know.
A bit of time left for questions, so if we go, I'm going to...
I think the guy in the white.
Sorry?
This gentleman's had his hand up a long time.
Gentleman there then, yes. And then we're going to go to Joey in the back row. It's the advantage of Joey working for me and having his own microphone. Did you bring it from home?
Do I get to go first because I have the microphone?
No.
Thank you, Dame Tamara. I really appreciated that. I used to be a long-time former civil servant, and it seems to me that suggesting that the civil servant's primary duty is the government of the day is not quite right, unless and until the government of the day has obtained the permission of Parliament. Now, it could be whichever legislature it is, Scotland, Wales, or England. Unless and until they have gained the power to change things, the civil servant's duty is to what was there before.
Right.
Joey, over to you.
My question builds on the digital angle, and thank you, Dame Tamara, for such wonderful insight so far. You mentioned that AI and digitization was one of the things we need to be thinking about for the civil service going forward. I wonder if you could elaborate on what you think the impact of AI will have on the civil service. Where do you think it'll add value? Where will it help? But also, where might it cause problems? And I'm also really interested in Michael's response to your comments.
So I think what we're seeing is, on this issue about the government, you're serving the government of the day, but they need to be empowered by legislation passed by Parliament, is, I think, the point that you're making. But obviously, they have a view as to what it is they'd like Parliament to pass. They generally will have a majority to pass it with, and they need the advice of civil servants as to how to shape that legislation. I suppose what's important about us having in our minds that we serve the government of the day is to be as facilitative as possible as to how to do that. And if I think of the government came in for DEFRA, wanted to do one of the first bills they took through was one on the water, industry. And, you know, I was very keen, and we did do it, that we did a root and branch review, which we did a root and branch review. John Cunliffe from the kind of Bank of England did a really fantastic review that was kind of very keen that we ensure that we actually can still get investment in the water industry to do a balanced and full review. Not surprisingly, the government, you know, comes in having fought a campaign with a lot of, you know, of challenge, making a lot of challenge around the water industry. We're like, yes, but we want to do a very fast bill where we make some changes around bonuses in the water industry, etc. So that, obviously, the answer is yes, of course, we'll draft that, and this would be what a review looks like. So, but I think, but you're obviously right. Then the question about how, so, you know, how AI will, you know, change what we do. We did an interesting experiment in the policy profession where we took 200 people, 200 volunteer policy advisors, and got half of them to do some exercises. It was minutes of a meeting, a briefing, and I can't remember what the third was, 3 things. 100 could use AI tools, and 100 couldn't, just had to do it without. And it was quite interesting. So it was a bit faster if you were using the AI tools. There were some significant kind of error problems that needed kind of fixing of the stuff that was done with AI. But the thing I thought was most interesting is that those who'd used the tools enjoyed the task more. So I think it's really interesting. So I think there is going to be something about how we learn how to operate with those tools and do our work in that way that will be really positive. I think none of us can quite know how this is going to change things, and certainly people like Mustafa Suleiman in the Coming Wave says this is more like the invention of the wheel on fire than it is the internet. So clearly we have to be open for it being incredibly transformational. And obviously there is a side which we have to look at around the kind of ethics of AI, and then the organisation that I'm going to, which has the, our engineers and technologists very focused on AI and a very strong interest in how do we, on the kind of ethics as AI is used and has that impact, and how can we assure that this industrial revolution has a more equitable benefit to it than previous ones, I think is a very significant part of it. So all I think we can know is that we will have significant change. We should be open to it, learn the skills to be able to do it well. And as I say, I would love to see the civil service and public service at the cutting edge, including using our procurement to, to be kind of anchor procurers of really interesting applications of AI. You're supposed to answer this as well.
I'm supposed to respond. Bob Solow said we see the computer revolution everywhere other than in the productivity statistics, because 40 years ago we were saying that computers were going to transform everything, and computers were much more like the invention of fire than they were like the invention of the motor car. I am, for that reason, skeptical. I'm particularly skeptical in the context of the vast majority of people who are telling me that this is going to be very transformational have quite a lot of money at stake in it being transformational. During the, a long time ago now, half a decade or more ago, local governments which were substantially squeezed in their funding by decisions made largely by central government, but also by increasing demand for statutory services, which they have no choice but to deliver, turned to the first wave of this revolution in the form of predictive analytics and machine learning in order to predict who was going to be in need early, help them early, and prevent both harm from coming to people and save money. That was the other one I wanted to do. Very, very important. A lot of money was spent by local government procuring services from companies that stood to make quite a lot of money out of having that service procured. We ran a large project with a number of local authorities basically to see, can we actually predict which children are going to be most at risk in local government? We have good reason to believe this is a good use case. There are tens of thousands of cases. We have incredibly rich data, which is hard for an individual to process and which machine learning is well suited to process because it involves the use of non-standard data. We spent a year and a half working with a dozen local authorities, and we concluded that it could not, in fact, make better predictions than random chance, and that in many cases it made predictions which were biased against members of particularly ethnic minorities because the system was already biased against those groups, and it was very good at magnifying those things. Now, this isn't to say that this can't work. It isn't to say that it doesn't work and that the new technology is not better than the old technology and that the use cases, particularly taking minutes in meetings, are somewhat lower stakes than should we take your child into care. Nonetheless, we require the makers of dangerous products like automobiles, and we require the makers of energy-consuming products like fridges to subject themselves to a standardized regime whereby the quality of their product on safety, fuel economy grounds is standardized and published so that when you as a consumer buying a fridge, as I think you probably did last week because you were on a Black Friday splurge, when you're buying a fridge, you know exactly how many kilowatts of energy it's going to use, and if it doesn't do that, then the people who made it can be fined enormous amounts of money. Before you put your child in a car seat, you should know whether or not it's going to be projected through the windscreen in the event of you needing to make an emergency stop. Before you subject your child to an artificial intelligence large language model, before you subject your country to governance by AI, you should probably ask for something in the region of the same kinds of levels of surety and evidence before you do that, is my view. But I am, of course, incredibly old-fashioned.
No, you're right.
I think I probably have time for one more question. And
you have to choose.
I don't have a great deal of diversity to choose from either. You seem younger than most of our other questioners.
Thank you both for thank you both. I've just finished the MPAC graduate scheme at Kensington and Chelsea. Now I have 2 years of extensive experience on local government policy, but I don't have much experience on central government policy. I was wondering, what are the key differences between central government policy versus local government policy, and how do you approach problems differently between local and central?
No, that's so, and I probably should have said actually in my, how will things look different in the sort of period that you were talking about, that I would hope we would continued on a journey where more things are devolved to the local, to the local level, and and I think that whole environment is changing a lot because the mayoral authorities of a sort of size and scale that enables them to do policy of a different sort at a different level is changing. I mean, the truth at a local government level is that there's not as much scope or capacity to do lots of policy making, and actually in building some of the professional skills we're developing for the policy profession in the civil service, quite keen to do it in a way that would be useful for those who are working in policy in local government to do so. But I think, as I say, I think one of the key things to do in local government, where you do have some scope really, is around that kind of regeneration and local growth. And as I say, a lot of that then is kind of happening now, also very much at that kind of mayoral level. So that is particularly where I think there's scope. That's not a great answer, but
it's a very good answer on that. So I will crib for one of our visiting professors, Jonathan Slater, who worked at senior levels in local government before coming into central government and becoming permanent secretary at the Department for Education. And he talks about the big difference being transparency, where the advice given by senior officials to elected members in local government is public, and the advice given to senior officials to ministers is by default private. You can take whether you think that's good or bad. Certainly, I would like my advice not to be public. So it's not a value judgment, but it is an observation.
I do kind of wonder about the advice that isn't in the published papers that go to the committees, I have to say. But I know that's Jonathan's view, is that we should do more of that.
Great. So I think I'm now handing over to Professor Jennifer Rubin, who's the chair of our advisory board. And all I have to say is thank you ever so much, Tamara. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We go down.
Thank you very much, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. Look, thank you. I'm Jennifer Rubin, as Michael said. I am the chair of the School for Government now. I'm very, very proud to be so, and you'll understand from those wonderful remarks and all the fantastic things you heard from Rachel about the School for Government, why that is the case. But that talk and that discussion, those responses, Michael and Tamara, really so interesting, so thoughtful as ever, and genuinely inspiring, not just tonight, but Tamara, you've been an inspiration to so many, but also in particular so many civil servants for so many years, and just incredible to be able to have worked with you some, and to be able to think about your next moves and the work that we might do here. So I'm not going to speak for long, because I am, as the saying goes, between you all and drinks. But I did want to just say that as someone who found my professional and professorial home at King's in 2015 for the first time, I am absolutely delighted to be back here as chair of the School for Government, working with Michael and the team. I did spend, since then, I spent a few years running a research council, and then I've just spent 5 years on Whitehall as one of the chief scientific advisors that Tamara referenced in her talk, and as a DG in HMG. And it's been an incredible experience, which I will not go into here again, because I'm going to be quick. But it's wonderful to see the educational offerings that the School for Government is developing, and Rachel alluded to some of those, working with the civil service policy profession, the FAST stream, and others here in the UK, expanding our work not only in the UK but with other countries too. As you've heard, the need for this kind of work and for the training of civil servants to be really outstanding at their jobs, to really draw on the expertise they need and so on, the need is great. And the opportunity is enormous if we can do it well. And it's not just in the UK that governments want to do better and want to improve outcomes for their citizens. So in order to help with this, we've been building an outstanding new advisory board for the School for Government, including leaders with expertise across sectors, across academia, across government, and across the diplomatic corps, for example, from Australia to the Seychelles, from the Emirates to the UK, and of course here in our very own fantastic international hub of London. So much of what we need to do crosses not only sectors but borders as well. And so being able to work internationally will be really important for us, and bringing people to London as well as going out to those places will be a real signature of the work we do. We're looking forward to the future, to working with many of you, to launching new exciting degree programs, including one with Bahrain in January, of which more later, and growing our international collaborations internationally, as I said. So now I'd just like to close by offering a huge thanks collectively from the School for Government to the Faculty of Social Science and Public Policy for all the immense support, which, as Michael said, without which none of this would be possible. A massive thanks to Bobby and the team at the Policy Institute who've made this evening possible, as well as many, many other things as well, and the wonderful collegiality of working together. And many thanks to all of you for coming this evening. I hope you found it as interesting and inspiring as I have, and I hope that we'll have many more such events to join together. So I hope that now everybody has a wonderful festive season ahead. And in that spirit, could I suggest that we all adjourn for drinks in the other room? And thank you so much again for a great evening.